Thanks for joining the Hunger for Justice series. I believe this is episode 30, Feeding the Warrior Spirit with Nichie Abo, moderated by Freya Yost. Thank you so much for joining us today. This session is being recorded and will be uploaded for public viewing on AGC's YouTube channel. I'll be populating the chat with some links to support the conversation. We'll also be taking questions from the audience. So if you have questions, we encourage you to put them in the chat if you're on the live stream channels or in the Q&A box in the Zoom. Again, this episode is being recorded and will be available for public viewing later today on the AGC YouTube channel. The Growing Culture is a movement support organization advancing a culture of farmer autonomy and agroecological innovation. Thank you all for joining us today. And here to introduce the program is Lauren Cardelli, founder of AGC.
Thank you, Julia. Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. This is a time for reflection. I think we've all had a mix of emotions this week, especially, but this year as a whole. I think Julia said this was the 30th episode. However, 2 of those were all-day events. So there's been about 50 sessions this year, 50 different presentations from 50 different speakers around the world, peasants, indigenous activists, agrarians, community organizers, artists came together to talk about a hunger for justice. And as we on that, one of the things that I personally realized was that not once in any of those sessions, spanning across the world, not once did anybody say, all we need to do is compost. All we need to do is buy this product. Not once did somebody say, please buy local. The reason why is because we know it's a complex issue. This is complicated. The intersectionality with this work goes across social and ecological spheres. And the work that the Kalinago is doing, that Nichie is dreaming and leading, is intersectional. It's a reimagination of everything. Because right now, at the end of the year, we have to take that moment to breathe deep, look inside, and dream dreams that we thought were impossible. So today, I'm so excited to be with Freya and Nichie Abo, 2 people that can understand and embrace complexity. We're excited for both of them to come today so that we can learn to unlearn and dream big. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Lauren. That was beautiful. So I'm going to introduce Nichie. Nichie was born on Waitukabuli in what was then called the Carib Reserve. He was delivered by the village midwife, Mayani. Using ancient techniques developed over thousands of years, she was able to turn him around in his mother's womb so his birth would not be a breached birth. He was born into a community with no Western medical care, no electricity, no running water, and no Western-style development. Most of his primary school education was delivered in the open, under the shade of trees, as his school was a small one-room building. Nichie attended secondary school at the Dominica Grammar School in Roseau, the capital of Dominica. He served as head boy of the class in 1978. In 1982, he migrated to St. Thomas in the US Virgin Islands, and in January of 1985, enlisted in the US Army Infantry Branch, where he emerged a highly decorated veteran. Among the many awards received, Nichie is the recipient of the Good Conduct Medal, the Army Achievement Medal, 2 Army Commendation Medals, the Air Assault Badge, the Elite French Commando Badge, and the Combat Infantryman's Badge. For his service in the Gulf War of 1991, Nichie was awarded the Bronze Star. Nichie has a bachelor's degree from the University of Maryland and a master's degree from the University of the Virgin Islands. He served 10 years as a state senator in the US Virgin Islands Senate, during which time he served for 2 years as vice president and 2 years as president. Nichie returned to his homeland in 2012 to join fellow Kalinago warriors in the continuing struggle for the survival of the Kalinago people. Throughout his life, Nichie has actively advocated for the preservation of Kalinago heritage, the revival of traditions, and the strategic development of the Kalinago territory. Nichie possesses the noble warrior spirit of his determined and fearless forefathers and is committed to the struggle for equality, the protection of traditions and culture of Indigenous peoples, and most importantly, to the preservation and regeneration of Mother Earth. Nichie, thank you so much for being here with us today. It's with deep gratitude that we welcome you, and I would like to ask that you open our dialogue in any way that you feel called to.
Mabrika, Freya, Mabrika to Lauren, Mabrika to anyone who is listening to us today and who will listen to us in the future. I am privileged and honored to participate in this forum with you, Freya. So first, I just want to take a moment to honor the ancestors who have laid the groundwork and the foundation for the life that we live today. I want to also recognize the leadership of the Kalinago people, my brother Shibutu, my brother Nikutubulu, my brother Mabrika, and our Ubutu, Sanford. I just want to recognize the leadership, and I hope sincerely that my discussion today and the views that I will share and the words that I will speak will be representative of a collective community that has collective dreams and aspirations. So I hope to do justice to our cause and to our people in this conversation. Thank you so much for having me on this program.
Thank you. Nichie, you suggested we call this dialogue Feeding the Warrior Spirit. What does that mean to you?
Well, the Kalinago people were a warrior people. We survived the whole colonial process, the 500 years of being hunted like wild animals, of attempted slavery, of being driven from our lands and from island to island, from coast to coast, up into the mountains. And it is the courage of my ancestors why there is even a Kalinago tribe still surviving and living and thriving today. So in order for this warrior spirit to continue to survive, to be, we have to keep feeding it. We got to sustain it. And there are, I think, three basic ways in which, as a tribe, we have fed our spirit. Well, first of all, there's the spirituality of our lives and our human presence on this earth. My ancestors and our tribe have always recognized the fact that we are connected to nature, that we are connected to everything that surrounds us. The trees exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide with us. The rains bring water that feeds the plants and the animals and feed us. The air that we breathe is clean because the plants clean it. We see each other and we live off the animals who feed us and the plants and the things that we grow. So our survival is based on a deep sense of spirituality and connection with nature and everything that surrounds us and this circle of life that we are a part of. And so for us to continue to survive as warriors and as human beings, we must protect our environment. We must protect the trees. We must protect life. We must protect our waters. We must protect our air. So that is one of the aspects of keeping our spirit fed is through our spirituality and our connection to the earth. The other thing is we have to eat. Food is such an important part of our survival. And the Kalinago people have survived because fundamentally we have always been able to feed ourselves. So no matter what the circumstances we have faced, no matter what challenges we have faced, we have always been able to feed ourselves. And so one of the things that we must continue to do and to protect is this ability to feed ourselves. Because at the end of the day, when the storms rage and when nations go to war and the ships can no longer come and we find ourselves isolated in our homes and in our gardens, we must be able to eat. And so our people have always placed great importance on being able to walk out into the yard and harvest a tomato or a papaya or ground provisions or cassava, which is one of our indigenous foods. So the ability to have food sovereignty, to feed ourselves no matter what, is another way that we have kept our warrior spirit alive. And I think thirdly is the ability to adapt and to be agile, because life is continuously changing. The challenges are different from generation to generation, but there are always challenges because that just seems to be the journey that humanity is on. And so we must be agile as a tribe. We must be able to adapt to circumstances and to global changes that impact our lives. I mean, climate change is one of those things. Our ancestors have always had to face natural disasters, but not with the intensity that they are hitting us today. So globalization is there. Technology is with us. I am here on this computer speaking to the world today. This is something that my ancestors would think could only happen through the spirits. But here I am. So one of the things that we have to do as a people is to continue to adapt, continue to be agile, so we can survive no matter what the challenges are.
I really appreciate that about being agile, because one of the things that we've seen with COVID is how fragile the global systems are. So I'm that's very alive for me right now. And Nichie, when we first met, it was during the very long and drawn out period after Hurricane Maria, and I had heard about the innovative work that the Kalinago were doing in the aftermath of the hurricane. I remember hearing about how there was no food insecurity in the Kalinago territory because of the root vegetables that had survived the hurricane underneath the ground. And you mentioned colonialism, and it feels like not enough people are looking at colonial history as the creator, or one of the creators and key drivers of the climate crisis, which in Dominica and in the Caribbean you experience firsthand through extreme weather, for one. And the colonial project really, began in a lot of ways in 1492 when Christopher Columbus landed in the Caribbean, and the Kalinago were one of the dominant groups in the Caribbean at that time. So I'm curious, what do you think about climate change? What are the origins of climate change? And are they related to the history of colonialism?
Well, that's an interesting question, Freya, because colonialism was a scourge on humanity. Uh, the need for Europeans to expand their borders and to generate wealth so they could fight each other over their kingdoms was a scourge. It has destroyed millions of people around the world, and the Kalinago were very directly impacted by the colonial project and European expansion and exploitation and slavery. Uh, the indigenous people, and this is not, unique to the Kalinago people. Indigenous people have always felt that we didn't own the earth, that we cannot own the earth, we cannot own the air, we cannot own the waters. How can you own that? It's not ours to own, and we have always felt that these things were created for us to coexist with and to survive and to help us feed our spirit. And so this European mentality of extraction and the gathering of wealth just brought about a tremendous change to this part of the world. When Columbus got lost at sea and drifted into our waters and met our ancestors, it may have been one of the, well, it is the worst thing that ever happened to indigenous people, really. And it is one of the worst things that happened to not just indigenous people, but to humanity. Because it is at that point in time that this extractive philosophy of digging into the earth and the fact that we are all connected and that the trees are our lungs and we need clean air and clean water and food that is not poisoned through chemicals, just so a few people can live in castles and palaces and fly in private jets and traverse our waters in this ridiculous mega yachts. So all of these things are driving climate change, and a lot of people are talking about climate change as though it is something that is sort of outside of our control. But we are the ones, we are the human beings that's allowing this stuff to be perpetuated on us. We are the ones who are busy for material things. We are the ones who want to have an air conditioned unit in every room because we have built this huge concrete monstrosities. We are the ones who are starving, but at the same time supporting a lifestyle for people that is so wasteful. So climate change is here. The European experiment and extraction philosophy has created this enormous problem. And it is going to take every single one of us on this planet to do some introspection and begin to think of how we as individuals are contributing to this destruction of our planet. The people who are destroying our planet through all of the pollution from their factories and this material, the pursuit of materialism, are now figuring out how they can get off the planet and go up to the moon and go up to Mars. And it's mind-boggling to me when I see that. And there are people in the most developed countries in the world, in Washington, D.C., and in New York City, and in California, and in London, and in Paris, and in Spain, and in Lisbon, who are dying from hunger, who have no clothes to wear. And yet these nations are so prosperous. the idea that there can be so much hunger in the world today at a time when there is so much wealth concentrated in such a small number of people is shameful. And we have to begin to say that. We have to begin to say and to recognize that food is a basic human right. I hear a lot of talk about healthcare should be a human right, and whatever else should be a human right. But what is the most fundamental thing that we need to live? We need food and clean water. And so those things should be basic human rights. Every human being on the face of this earth should have access to clean water and something to eat. So this is the struggle that we have, is to provide this type of life, while at the same time honoring and respecting the planet that is providing us with life. So climate change is a very complex thing. It's amazing to me that some people can still question the science of climate change. And it just appears to me that it is just out of political ambition and you know. But the Kalinago people have been faced with many challenges. Recently, we had Hurricane Maria, which devastated our community, devastated our housing stock. But not a single Kalinago person died from the hurricane. And immediately after the storm had passed, we certainly had no issues with feeding ourselves, because we have always grown our own food, and we grew crops that are both above ground and underground, and we continue to do that. As a matter of fact, I have noticed recently with the advent of COVID that our people are really delving more into agriculture and beginning and becoming even more self-sufficient, because there is the movement of people is sort of restricted, and we are sort of restricted to our communities and our homes. And I think we are using that time in a very progressive and being very productive in planting and ensuring that we can survive no matter what the climate throws at us. But climate change is something, I believe, Freya, that every human being must really look at their lifestyle, look at how they live, look at their value system, because that is what is at the basis and foundation of climate change.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's it's an introspective process that we need to go through, a reflection process. And I loved hearing you outline the.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, the one thing that I would mention is when the Europeans came to this part of the world and encountered the indigenous people in the United States, Turtle Island, in the Caribbean and South America, the philosophy that was practiced and the lifestyle that was practiced at the time, had Europeans adapted that lifestyle rather than imposing the extractive philosophy upon these populations, we would today have no problem with climate change. There would be no idea of climate change. But it is the fact that indigenous lifestyle was desecrated and driven into the ground and not respected, why we are dealing with it right now. And so I think maybe we're at a point where the developed countries and people, the European people, may now are now becoming sensitive and now becoming aware that there is an alternative way to live, and that we can live in harmony with nature, and that may be our saving grace.
That's such an important point, because I've heard some groups talking about, thinking about colonialism as if it were simply a series of events in the past. But what you're saying is that actually these events, the mentalities and the infrastructures and systems that came from these events still exist today. And, we see land grabs and systemic oppression and exploitation of indigenous groups. And so this climate crisis that we're in is much more complex, and it has deeply historical roots. And on that note, we tend to think of climate change as a technical or a scientific problem or an economic problem, and certainly there are dimensions of climate change that have those problems. And yet, one of the things that was most inspiring when I came across the Kalinago in your work was the emphasis on regenerating Indigenous culture, regenerating Kalinago culture. So I'm wondering, how is the regeneration of culture critical to the community's resilience in the face of extreme weather and climate change?
Well, indigenous culture has always been a respect really for nature, a total understanding and sensitivity to the fact that we are not, that nothing in nature belongs to us, that we are not here in isolation as a species, that we are connected in a circle of life. And I think that if humanity could begin to accept that and to incorporate that into our daily life, by just respecting each other, by loving each other, by giving service to our community, by preserving the environment, by doing things that are not destructive to the elements that we need to survive, to our water, to our rivers. That really is what we should be doing. And that is what indigenous people have always done. The European model and the European way of life, which has been to sort of extract everything so that we can accumulate wealth. And what do we do with the wealth? You know, we build these monstrosities. We have wealthy people with homes that are like castles, right? And we think we have left the colonial stages, the colonial experience behind, but in truth, in fact, it has just been replaced by another more sophisticated colonialism. We are still essentially in a global situation where maybe 90 to 95% of the human beings in this earth are working to support 5%, the lifestyle of 5% of the people who survive on this earth. We are all essentially, at least, well, many of us anyway, are engaged in activities, and we go through our life like little machines. We wake up in the morning, we go to a job, we take a lunch break, we get back to work, we get home to our families, we sit down to dinner, we watch the television. It's such a routine, and sometimes we don't stop to feel the life that we're living. And I was really, well, I wasn't surprised, but I was so sad about the situation in the United States and in Europe when COVID really hit, right? And you have all of these people who are used to a particular lifestyle, who are now hungry, who cannot live comfortably anymore, who no longer have homes because they have lost a job. They have just lost the work that they were doing, and they have no resources, nothing to live on. They are in food lines. What type of life is that? If you work all of your human life so that you can only spend your paycheck at the end of the month. This cannot be what our life was meant to be. And so the Kalinago people, while we have had many challenges and we don't live the sort of Western life, right? We don't have homes with air conditioning units. We don't have a whole tonload of vehicles driving up and down. We don't have really fancy name brand clothes and fancy Nike shoes and all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, we can feed ourselves. We're not going to be hungry, and we have a roof over our heads. We're not going to be out in the elements, and we take care of our neighbors. We take care of each other. So I think our idea of life, and to some extent, where our experience and our history has placed us, is not such a bad place. And you know, our young people are struggling with the modern things because they want the iPhones and they want, you know, the large screen computers and all of that stuff, that the materialism that's being driven by these people who are living off of us, who are sucking our blood. And we are willingly giving it to them because we are not conscious and we are not aware of what is real and what is not, you know. So I just think that our history has put us in a place that we must appreciate. We must appreciate it because we can survive even when we lose a job. We can survive and not be hungry and not starve because we can feed ourselves. We can survive because we look out for each other as a community and we help each other and we work with each other. And we can survive because we have kept some of our traditions, some of our culture with us, and we have maintained our appreciation and our relationship with the earth and with the elements that give us life.
Yeah, that's such an incredible critique of Western culture too. It's like in the absence of community and a sense of belongingness, you know, so many of us in the West turn towards consumerism or you know, substances to, you know, appease this deep-rooted need that is not being met inside of us. And the way that I hear you speaking to the Kalinago culture and its connectedness to land and its history and its traditions, that you know, that now I see how relevant that is and how missing it is in the Western culture. And I can sort of trace how there are so many sort of alienated, lonely, you know, communities around the world that have been uprooted from place, from belonging. And so, you know, when we look to the indigenous cultures that are still intact, we admire them and we value them because we see that we have lost that and we have destroyed that in so many places and continue to do that. So so climate change in this context it's not this externality of a system, or it's not some glitch in a system that is, you know, largely intact and is working fine. It's actually you know, these are the rules of the system, and the system is programmed at a very deep level, patterned, if you will, for these sorts of tendencies. And the symptoms of this deep illness that, so there's a fly around me, that come out in all of these ways: inequality, poverty, climate change, environmental degradation, loss of culture. These are not externalities of a system that is working. These are, in fact, symptoms of a deep, deep illness. And to address them as glitches in the system would be to fall short. We need to actually go down to the root to which you speak, which I think can be found, can be located in connectedness to place. And therefore, indigenous cultures, the ones that are still intact and can be regenerated, are critical partners in the you know, quest for solutions around climate change. So I think we need to start thinking about marginalized communities, indigenous communities, not as mere, it's not just about human rights. It's actually about involving these communities in key decision-making processes to shift the underlying pattern on which we've basically built Western society and the modern world.
I couldn't agree more. I absolutely agree with that.
I've been reading a little bit about the reparations movement that's happening in the Caribbean, sort of an attempt to reconcile the genocidal and oppressive history of colonialism in the region. And in 2013, the Caribbean heads of government established the Caricom Reparations Commission. And I'm wondering if they've engaged Indigenous groups, and what are your thoughts about that effort?
Yeah, that's a great question, Freya. And this is something that I have been given some thought to, and I have actually had some interaction with some of the people who are involved in this movement. And the way I see that, I sort of have a different view of this idea of reparation from the people who are pursuing reparation right now. So let's start with the fact that when Columbus sort of landed by accident in this part of the world, the Kalinago people occupied the lands from Trinidad in the south all the way through, I would say, Puerto Rico in the north. All of those lands were occupied by Kalinago people. Today, the Kalinago people occupy 3,700 acres of land on the island of Waitukubuli, which is 2% of the landmass of Waitukubuli. This is what we have been relegated to. So if there is any tribe or any entity or any group in the Caribbean that is definitely entitled to reparation, it would be the Kalinago people and the other indigenous peoples in the Caribbean. And so I find that the movement for reparation is being driven by the descendants of the African slaves who are now the governments and who are now in the majority in the Caribbean. So these are our brothers and sisters who we as Kalinago people helped to liberate from slavery. When the African people were enslaved and brought to the Caribbean, in many of the Caribbean islands that the Kalinago people occupied at the time, the Kalinago people would free the slaves from their masters. They would have raids on the plantations to free slaves. And the slaves themselves who escaped from the plantations would look for Kalinago communities for them as a refuge. And so we have a long enduring relationship with the descendants of Africa. But today we find ourselves in a position where these people, these very same people who we helped and who we were allies with, are now in control of the lands that were ours. They inherited these lands from our European conquerors, right? From the colonial powers. These governments that are in power today throughout the Caribbean inherited these islands from England, from Spain, from France, and whoever, and they are now in control of these lands. So the first question that I raise is, what have these governments done for the indigenous people of the Caribbean? In particular, my tribe, the Kalinago tribe. What have all of these governments done to repair this experience that we have had? What have their actions been? So because it is in their power today, as we speak, you and I today, The Caribbean governments, the people who are in charge of St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Grenada, Antigua, Dominica, all of these islands, the governments that are in charge can make decisions today because they are the ones in charge. They are the governments that run the countries. They can make decisions that could positively impact indigenous people today. They don't have to seek permission from England. They don't have to seek permission from Spain or France or anybody. They could make decisions to erect monuments in their countries to the Kalinago warriors and heroes who fought for these lands. They can make decisions to give citizenship to Kalinago people who still exist today. Because when we own these lands, we move freely between islands. But today, if I want to go across the sea to St. Lucia or to Guadeloupe or to Marigalant, which I can see from my window, I need a passport, I need all sorts of documents, and there's all sorts of citizenship and everything. There are Caribbean islands and governments, people today who can make certain decisions that would impact positively the ability of Kalinago people to have a higher quality of life, to have better economic conditions, to have better health care, to have better education. All of these decisions Caribbean governments can make today without anybody else. So I think on this issue of reparations, that is where we should start. And then include the Kalinago people and the indigenous people in these islands as an integral part of the reparations movement, not as an appendage, not as one person to just come in and attend a meeting because you think it makes a better case for you at a higher level. We should be an integral and leading part of any reparations movement. But it would be a good example to set. If we are going to go to England and say, we want reparations and we want you to do certain things for the people of Africa who were enslaved and for all of this terrible treatment that they've had, it would be good to say to them and see, this is what we have done for the indigenous people who live now in our communities. Here is what we have done as Caribbean governments. So can you follow our example? Because we are setting the example for you on how to treat indigenous people and how to treat people who have been affected negatively through the colonial process. So I have very strong feelings and thoughts about this idea of reparations. I think it is an important movement. I think it has to be pursued. I am glad that the Caricom governments have initiated it, but I would like to see the Caribbean governments themselves begin to make decisions that impact positively indigenous people in these islands. How about St. Lucia and St. Vincent identifying some lands in their countries that indigenous Kalinago people can have access to? For a tribe that owned all of the lands from Trinidad to Puerto Rico to be now relegated to 3,700 acres of land, 2% of the island of Waitukubuli, is shameful, and Caribbean governments should do and address that issue more specifically through the reparations movement.
Thank you. That's such a powerful call to action. And I think it sort of leads perfectly into my next question, which is around the Doctrine of Discovery, which is something I only recently learned about, but it's a fictitious law that emerged from 3 papal bulls in the 15th century that essentially justified the seizing of land and murder of indigenous people who lived on them. So when we're talking about, repatriation of lands, and this is really a critical part of that. And many groups are calling for the dismantling of the Doctrine of Discovery, calling on the Vatican to rescind this, because the Doctrine of Discovery, from what I understand, is still cited in case law in the US and around the world. So it's still impacting today. And this is another great example of how colonialism is not an event that happened in the past. It's actually a structured mentality and infrastructure that is carried on into into our present day, and is having real effect on indigenous access to lands. So I'm wondering if you can speak to the Doctrine of Discovery.
You know, Freya, the doctrine of discovery is one of the most, well, maybe the most ridiculous and um, dehumanizing actions and decisions that was taken uh, by the Europeans. Um, the church, the Catholic Church, uh, is a very critical part of the world, but in the Caribbean, the church is a very important institution. Uh, in the Kalinago territory, the church is a very important institution. And I understand the need of the human being to want to have a connection to something that is bigger than us and superior to us. And I think indigenous people prior to Christianity being introduced by Europeans, I think indigenous people had a very strong spirituality. Many of the tribes had great spiritual elders and lived life in a way that encompassed all of the values of Christianity. As a matter of fact, I was reading a book some time ago, and there was a famous chief in the United States of one of the tribes up there. I don't remember his name. I don't know if it was Chief Joseph or some other chief, but one of the very famous chiefs. In speaking with Europeans, with the American government officials at the time, said, you know, you preach, you talk about Jesus, and Jesus said, you know, do not kill. Jesus said, do not steal. Jesus said to love your neighbor as yourself, and to be kind and all of these values. And he said at the time, I remember reading it, and you know, he said, it seems to me that Jesus was an Indian, because those were the values of the indigenous people that they were preaching. But the fact of the matter is that they were preaching one set of value systems, but their actions are completely in the opposite direction. So rather than not killing, they were massacring the indigenous people. Rather than not stealing, they were stealing their land, stealing their women, stealing their children, stealing their possessions, stealing their buffalo. They were stealing everything. So Christianity has a very soiled history, and this papal bull doctrine came out of the church. I don't understand today why the Roman Catholic Church has not come out and openly disavowed this doctrine and essentially say that this was a mistake, that we have, through this doctrine, exterminated millions of people, and we want to make amends, and you know, that's what they should do. I mean, the United States, as you said, has used the same language in this doctrine to acquire all of the Indian lands and to take away all of their properties, and that's the same doctrine that is used to validate and to justify these actions. So why something like that still exists today is beyond me. This is a philosophy and a doctrine that should have been gotten rid of decades ago. And we talk about being civilized and enlightened and educated and all of this stuff. And yet we have this type of doctrine still in place that essentially said that these indigenous people were not human beings, that they were some other type of animal that you could own and exploit and beat and kill at will. So, you know, it's unfortunate and it's sad, really. It sort of saddens my heart when I interact with people in my community who are Christians, who go to church every Sunday, and who worship and who believe in the Catholic Church and its value systems. And you know, I think Christ was an amazing philosopher, an amazing influence in the world, and his philosophy and his teachings are beautiful and full of love and kindness. But the actions of the people who have perpetuated this religion are totally contradictory to the value system and to the love and stuff that Christ preached. I mean, when the Europeans came to this part of the world, they came with a flag in one hand. They put their flag down. They had a sword in one hand and a Bible in the other hand. And if you didn't kneel down and obey and become a Christian, they cut your head off. You know, I mean, this is how Christianity was spread in this part of the world. So I think it's more than time. And from reading some of the news in the world, it appears that the Pope is becoming, this current Pope is more sensitive, it seems, to the plight of people in the world and to the exploitation of people and to the exploitation and degradation of the environment and to the equality of gender and race. And I certainly just hope and pray that this doctrine will at some point in time be placed on the heap of fire and burnt in the history book so that we no longer have to have decisions that are based on that doctrine. It's really terrible and dehumanizing.
Yeah. You know, this is something that I struggle a lot with. You know, I live in Italy. I live right near Assisi. You know, Pope Francis, on his first trip, you know, outside of the Vatican since COVID happened, he came to Assisi and he signed into being a new encyclical called Fratelli Tutti. And in this encyclical, he talks about unfeathered capitalism, and he makes a whole series of critiques on the dominant world systems that are extractive and harming indigenous people and marginalized and exploiting and feeding off of the hurt of so many groups among us. And you know, I read that and I'm inspired, and I'm thankful that Pope Francis, you know, expresses the spectrum and breadth of ills in the world. And as you speak to so eloquently, there's this deep hypocrisy in the church, in this, you know, huge ship of an institution that with the left hand proclaims and apologizes and seeks to address climate change and poverty and inequality and human rights issues, and with the other hand perpetuates and feeds these things. And the Catholic Church is incredibly active in the development world, right? There are so many, you know, institutions that are working with indigenous communities around the world. And it's hard for me to reconcile and make sense of this deep hypocrisy. I'm wondering, you know, how you know, when these inspiring leaders come to the top, even though they may individually seek to do good and challenge the dominant power structures, how can they actually make change when every, you know, these dominant global systems are what's driving, you know, is it even possible? So I don't know if you want to speak to the hypocrisy in that, but it's something that I've come across a lot in the development world.
I mean, clearly, the development structure that we have in the world today, this whole capitalism and extractive industries and systems that we have, really, it's basically all founded upon this doctrine. That dehumanized a certain number of people in the world and created this this perception that there's a super race and only one race that is entitled to be human. And so much of what is happening in the world today is still based on that. I mean, like I said earlier, I believe that we are still living almost in a feudal system where people are still working for the elite, for somebody who's sitting up, living in a castle, jetting around the world in a super jet and cruising the oceans in a 1,000-foot yacht. And then you have a event like COVID, and 90% of the population cannot pay their rent because they live in a house that belongs to somebody, that belongs to somebody else, that belongs to a corporation, that belongs on the stock market, and then you don't even know who owns it. So until we just begin to recognize each other as fellow human beings who are on a journey together, who share a common space, who are connected in this circle of life, who are all precious and who all have a contribution to make, but who all deserve to have a decent life, a decent quality of life. And oftentimes, you know, I think we sort of romanticize this indigenous lifestyle. I think a lot of Europeans, maybe, and people from the Western world who are searching, sort of romanticize the lifestyle of indigenous people. But indigenous people have difficult lives. They have difficult lives. Many of them in our community, healthcare is nowhere where it should be. The world is changing and people are heading to the moon, and some of our children go to school and can't read and write because the educational system is not designed to lift them up. It is designed to keep them in a place where they will work for somebody for the rest of their lives and never work for themselves and never understand their true value. Where we don't teach our children how to use the currency that is global, you know. So this is such a complex thing, and I think those of us who have a little bit of consciousness, who are slightly connected to each other, and who feel this need and this desire to make it right, and to love each other, and to lift each other up from whatever circumstances that we find ourselves in. We have to continue to be hopeful, and we have to continue to work towards it, and we have to continue to devote our lives to changing, because that's the only hope. And maybe the system is so huge and so big that we will never be able to change it, but I think we have to continue to work and to advocate and to say and to speak when we see and feel that things are wrong and they're going in the wrong direction. We have to have the courage to stand up and to say that. And so that's why I have a lot of respect for Lauren and the Growing Culture organization, for yourself, for the work that you do, and for all of the other participants who have participated in this program. I have looked at many of the other programs, and I see that there's work to be done, but there are people who are engaged in this work, and we must always remember that even at times when we feel we are the only ones doing it, that's not the case. There are millions of people around the world who are connected for the work that they do, for their consciousness, for their spirituality, and for their love of this planet and love for humanity.
Nichie, I have one more question, if you'll allow it. And I've been very involved in the regenerative development community, as have many of our colleagues that we have in common. And I see a lot of sort of talk about Indigenous knowledge systems and how living systems science is proving what Indigenous communities have known for centuries, and that's all wonderful. And yet there tends to be a very low representation from Indigenous groups in these regenerative development spaces. And I've noticed there is perhaps what I'm sensing, a lack of will to get into the political dimensions and the hard lives that you speak of that Indigenous people experience. And I'm wondering, and I once heard a Lakota elder named Tiokesin Ghost Horse say, you know, the sustainability, I believe he was referring to the sustainability movement, but I'm paraphrasing a little bit. And he said, you know, they want our culture, but they do not want to feel our pain. And when we talk about the doctrine of discovery, and we talk about land back movements, and we talk about addressing climate change, it seems critical that we also stand up for justice. So my question is, can regeneration happen without justice, without addressing the fundamental inequalities in the systems, the colonial power structures, the doctrine of discovery?
Yeah, and my answer to that is no. It cannot exist. The people who are involved in the scientific world, who are bringing much of these new discoveries, first of all, have to give recognition to Indigenous people, because much of the discoveries that they are writing about, that they are now doing academic studies about, all originate from Indigenous communities. This biochar and this scientific farming things and all of this, a lot of it, if you just research it a little further back from the academia, we will realize that those are practices and value systems that have been used by Indigenous people for thousands of years. So Indigenous people need to be given the credit for those things. The reason why we are in the place that we are today with climate change and all these challenges, it's because we did not recognize those practices and those value systems 500 years ago, when the Europeans encountered Indigenous people. Today, we are going back and studying these Indigenous communities and recognizing the value of the knowledge that much of which was destroyed. We are now having people come into our communities and asking about different plants and their medicinal values. We are discovering all of these cures for cancer and whatever else from things that I grow in my yard, from things that my ancestors have known for many years were medicinal herbs and had health benefits. So all of these things are now coming to light, but the fact is, it's not helping to change the fundamental problem that we have, which is a problem of inequality. So don't ask me to stand up and to share my values and to share all that our ancestors know and the knowledge, and continue to remain and live in poverty while this knowledge is used to sustain a lifestyle that is unsustainable. We cannot ask Indigenous communities to share and to give all of their knowledge. And that is what's happening. I read the magazines, I can see a lot of that stuff. I was reading this thing on biochar recently, and this is something that was developed by the Indians in South America. But now it's a big thing, like it's new, but it's not. So I think Indigenous people want to participate in the upliftment and the changing of course of our civilization. a civilization that cares and is connected to nature and that can really heal the planet. But it cannot happen at the expense of keeping indigenous people in the poverty and the condition in which Western civilizations have placed them, and use the knowledge to support the same system that has been destroying the world. So I don't really know what the answer is, but I think these communities, these organizations, the scientists who are developing all of this new knowledge and publishing all of these new systems of agriculture and all of these things, part of the discussion must be, how do we improve the lives of these indigenous people whose knowledge it is that we are using? How does it benefit them and benefit humanity, but does not only benefit developed countries and continue to allow developed countries to have a level of quality of life, which is really so far different. And I'm not going to say superior, because it's really not superior, it's just different. It's just a different lifestyle. Because I don't want to live in an air-conditioned building. You know, I don't want to have sushi or all kinds of foods that are, you know, we say that's exotic and you got to pay, you know, $1,000 for a plate. And at the end of the day, it's really not, things that I can go out into the sea myself and catch and eat it, you know. But there are people who will pay thousands of dollars for it. We have to come, I think, to a really revolutionary realization that the course that developed countries have been pursuing, it's just the wrong course. And that's what's destroying the world. That's what's causing climate change. People got to begin to take responsibility for it individually. And at the end of the day, Freya, I think, you know, it just really comes down to this Christian value of love, of loving each other and caring for each other, lifting each other up, and wanting the same thing for our neighbors that we want for ourselves. We cannot want to live a completely different life from our neighbor and expect our neighbor to sustain that lifestyle at our expense. It's not reasonable.
Thank you so much, Nichie. This has
Wow.
been an incredible conversation, and it's been such an honor to share it with you and to hold space for this. And we've got a little over time, so I'll pass it over to Lauren. But yeah, none of us is free until all of us are free. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for allowing me to speak the words that I have spoken. I hope that my brothers and sisters who will listen to what I have said will take it from the position which I have given it, out of love, out of my simple humanity, and my appreciation for this beautiful planet. It is where my words have come from, and I hope that's how it will be received.
Thank you so much, Nichie. Thank you, Freya. That was an incredible conversation. You know, one thing that was in my mind during that conversation was how a lot of people feel a deep connection to the environment. You know, they put on a documentary, they feel something, they see something in the news that makes them emotional. They take a walk in the forest and they feel deeper connected. But are they willing to kind of fight for that? Are they willing to tap into their warrior spirit? You know, when you said we have to protect the oceans, to protect the rivers, to protect the forest, there's a difference there that's not always heard. Like, what does protection mean? Like, and the act of protecting something, you have to tap into that deeper warrior spirit that you have, and how deep are you willing to go into that warrior spirit to protect something, you know? And in small communities and in a hyper local world, You don't have to protect the ones that you know. But in today's world, we must be willing to protect the ones we don't know, to fight for the ones we don't know, and to tap into that warrior spirit so that we can be more than just an ally, but an accomplice. Absolutely. Fighting alongside them. And so I know we've gone over, but I would love just to end this with the statement about that warrior spirit and how you find it so well and how you hold dear and how you use that as a compass.
Well, Lauren, I grew up in a very simple community. I bathed in the river. I learned to swim in the ocean right down here. Had very little clothes. I think I had my first pair of shoes when I was 6 or 7 years old. I just walked barefoot all over the place. I try to still do it today. But I have had the privilege of moving outside of my community and spending some time in the developed world and experiencing the lifestyle that a lot of Western people experience. And I can compare one with the other. And when I came back home and I felt the warmth and the beauty of this place, I knew in my heart, and I know in my heart, that human beings are meant to live with this. I don't think we were created to live in these concrete jungles that people have created. I think we were meant to be able to feel each other when we meet and when we look into each other's eyes and when we talk and we hear each other's voice and we embrace. I don't think we were meant to just get on a train and move like little robots. I think there's a system that has pushed us in that direction. And the people who are in that system have to wake up, Lauren. They got to get up. They got to open their eyes. They got to open their hearts. They got to feel their own life and question whether this is what it's all about. Was I supposed to be born and to just be on a train back and forth and a hustle and then die and rot into the ground and whatever this material stuff that I been working for just is now nothing? Where is my humanity? So that's where I come from. That's where my spirit comes from. I think that's where my ancestors came from. It's this idea of living in harmony with people, with animals, and with plants, and in the air and the water, and understanding that at the end of the day, when my life is ended, I simply go back into the soil and I become part of another cycle. And if I can respect that cycle, if I can respect all of the things around me and love all of the things around me, then life has been well worth living.
Thank you, Nichie. Thank you very much for that.
And thank you, Lauren, for the work that you're doing. It is people like you who are using the platforms that you have created to share knowledge, to share information. It is people like you who will bring people like me and all of your other participants together to try and create a movement in this earth that will benefit humanity in the long term. So thank you for the work that you're doing. And thank you to all the participants who participated on your show. I have appreciated what they have said. I have learned from them, and I hope what I have shared that someone will learn something from it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Everyone, there is not an account that you can follow. There's not a product that you can purchase. There's not the takeaway. The call to action is to listen, to look in, and carry these words and think about the next steps, and think if we can come together to actually dream something bold. Please reach out to Growing Culture if you want to reach Nichie, or to email him at nichieabo8. Please carry those words with you. Tune in every Friday. Another voice from around the world. Another opportunity to learn, to unlearn. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Nichie and Freya. That was incredible. Really.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nichie. Thank you, Lauren and Julia, and the whole AGC team.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Sure.
Thank you. One love.
One love, Nichie.